The first rays of the morning sun barely touched the skyline of Lagos, casting a golden shimmer over the bustling streets below. In a modest apartment tucked above a quiet side street, Aisha stirred awake, her body aching from another night of restless sleep. She didn't have the luxury of lying in. There were 3 jobs waiting for her, and each one was a stepping stone she carried alone to pay off the mountain of debts her husband had left in their wake. Her alarm buzzed sharply, cutting through the faint hum of the city below. Aisha rubbed her eyes, swinging her legs over the edge of the bed. Her feet touched the cold, tile floor, and she winced. She could feel the familiar stiffness of exhaustion in her joints, a souvenir of yesterday's 12-hour shift at the cafe, followed by an evening at the call center, and a final late-night tutoring session. Grabbing her worn-out tote, she muttered under her breath, 3 more jobs, 3 more steps closer. The words sounded hollow even to her ears, but she kept repeating them like a mantra. In the kitchen, the small radio played softly, a local Afrobeat station buzzing with energy that felt worlds away from the fatigue weighing her down. She poured herself a cup of bitter instant coffee, its steam fogging up her glasses, and glanced at the tiny stack of unpaid bills on the counter. Each one was a reminder of the sacrifices she made, sacrifices her husband never seemed to acknowledge. Before we continue with Aisha's story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video so you never miss another dramatic twist. Her phone buzzed with a message. "Running late, won't be home for dinner tonight," it read, from him. She let out a sigh, setting the phone down as if the act itself could shield her from the sharp sting of disappointment. The man she had trusted, the one she had worked herself to the bone for, barely noticed the life she had built around his mistakes. By the time Aisha stepped onto the streets, the city was fully awake. Street vendors shouted over the roar of traffic, hawking everything from roasted corn to freshly squeezed sugarcane juice. Minibuses rattled along the dusty roads, honking and swerving with a reckless familiarity. Aisha weaved through the crowd, her uniform pressed and her satchel secured. People passed by, oblivious to the fire burning in her chest, the weight of her burden pressing her down, yet refusing to break her spirit. Even in her exhaustion, Aisha's steps carried a quiet dignity. Each footfall was a declaration: she would survive. She would endure. And no matter how invisible her sacrifices seemed to others, they were not unseen to her. As she reached the entrance to the cafe where her first shift awaited, she took a deep breath, bracing herself for another long day. Little did she know, the life she had built on resilience and sacrifice was about to collide with a secret she could never have imagined. By the time Aisha pushed open the apartment door, the city outside had already traded its golden sunset for neon lights and distant sirens. Lagos never truly slept, it only changed tempo. The corridor light flickered as she stepped inside, her shoulders slumped, her heels dangling from tired fingers. The apartment greeted her with silence. No laughter. No television humming in the background. No warm welcome home. Just stillness. She closed the door gently behind her, as though afraid even sound might cost money. The air inside was warm, slightly stale. She moved toward the kitchen, switching on a dim light that cast long shadows across the tiled floor. Her uniform still smelled faintly of coffee and fryer oil from her first shift, mixed with the artificial air freshener from the call center office. It clung to her like proof of how hard she had worked. On the small dining table sat the familiar stack of envelopes. Bills. Notices. Final reminders. She set her bag down and lowered herself into the wooden chair. For a moment, she just stared at them. The edges were worn from being opened and reopened, numbers memorized against her will. Rent. Car loan. Credit card balances she hadn't even known existed until collectors started calling. She picked one up and whispered under her breath, "Just a little more. I'll clear this one next month." Her voice echoed in the quiet room, sounding smaller than she felt inside. Aisha reached for her calculator, punching in figures with mechanical precision. Salary from the cafe. Pay from the call center. The tutoring cash she kept tucked in a jar above the fridge. She subtracted, added, recalculated. The numbers refused to cooperate. Outside the window, distant music floated up from a nearby street vendor closing shop. The smell of grilled suya drifted faintly through the night air, teasing her empty stomach. She hadn't eaten since mid-afternoon, but food felt like a luxury tonight. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. A message from her husband. Don't wait up. Out with friends. No heart emoji. No question about her day. Just that. She stared at the screen for a long moment before placing it face down. I'm not waiting, she murmured quietly. I'm surviving. Her eyes fell back to the bills. Each piece of paper wasn't just debt, it was time. Months of her life. Energy she would never get back. The apartment may have been small, but the weight inside it felt enormous. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion, beneath the loyalty and hope, a quiet crack began forming in her trust. Because tonight, for the first time, the silence felt different. Heavy. Suspicious. And it wouldn't stay silent for long. Aisha barely had time to breathe when her phone buzzed against the cluttered dining table, cutting through the low hum of the city outside. She picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly from fatigue and the tension that had been building all evening. The screen lit up with his name, Tariq. Hello, she answered, her voice calm, hiding the weariness that weighed down every syllable. Hey, my love. You're home early tonight? Tariq's voice floated through the speaker, smooth and casual, as if the world belonged to him alone. Yes. I'm just resting for a bit, she replied, forcing a small smile she knew he couldn't see. Oh, great. Listen, I've got dinner with the investors tomorrow night. And the gala on Friday, you know, the one I mentioned last week? Think you can make it? His tone was light, almost playful, completely unaware of how heavy her day had been. Aisha gritted her teeth, pouring herself another cup of bitter coffee from the chipped mug she always used. I'll see, she said softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't tell him she had already worked 16 hours that day, that her body ached in every joint, or that the thought of social events made her want to collapse into the cushions she didn't have time to sink into. And a car loan? Did you manage the payment I sent you last week? Tariq continued, completely casual. Yes, I've taken care of it, Aisha replied, her voice steady though her heart tightened. She masked the irritation creeping in, the frustration at how little he seemed to notice the sacrifice behind every naira she had earned. Perfect, he said, chuckling. You really are amazing, you know that? I don't know what I'd do without you handling all this stuff. Aisha pressed her lips together, holding back the bitterness threatening to rise. Just doing what needs to be done, she said. Exactly, he laughed again. Oh. And I've invited a friend over later tonight. Don't worry about it, just relax. You deserve it after all that work. Aisha's chest tightened. A friend. That casual word landed like a stone in the quiet room. Her exhaustion suddenly felt heavier, and yet she smiled softly, hiding the storm building inside her. Okay. I'll be here, she said, her voice calm, almost mechanical. The call ended with his familiar, carefree laugh echoing in her ear, leaving her staring at the phone long after the screen went dark. The city outside had grown quieter now, only the distant honking and shouts from street vendors marking the rhythm of the night. Aisha leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The contrast between her tireless sacrifice and Tariq's casual, almost careless life pressed down on her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of unease flickered, small, but persistent. Something in tonight's call felt different. And that difference, subtle as it was, would soon grow into something that would shatter everything she thought she knew. The apartment hummed with quiet tension as Aisha moved from room to room, her hands busy but her mind racing. Plates from her hurried dinner were stacked in the sink, a thin layer of grease still clinging to them. She wiped down the counters with practiced efficiency, the small apartment echoing softly with the sound of her rag scraping against the worn tiles. Each motion was mechanical, yet her eyes kept flicking toward the living room doorway, toward the silence that felt heavier than usual. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down. Tarek. With a hesitant breath, she swiped to answer. Hey, love. Tarek's voice came, cheerful and casual. I hope you're not too tired. I'm managing, she replied, tightening her grip on the dishcloth. Good, good. Listen. I was thinking of inviting a friend over tonight. Nothing formal, just someone I've been talking to lately. Shouldn't take long. You'll be fine with that, right? Aisha froze mid-swipe. A friend? Her mind raced. Who was this friend? Why tonight? The words felt off, casual, too casual, hiding something she couldn't yet name. Yes, of course, she said slowly, forcing her tone light. I'll finish up here. Perfect. Tarek's voice rang again, bright and unconcerned. Don't worry about a thing, love. Just rest when you can. The call ended, leaving Aisha staring at the receiver in her hand. A cold flutter settled in her stomach. Suspicion gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. There were still chores to finish, still bills to review, still life to manage. She set the phone down and took a deep breath, trying to ground herself. She moved to the small laundry area, gathering clothes from the basket, feeling the weight of exhaustion in her shoulders. The hum of the old washing machine filled the apartment, and she tried to focus on the rhythm, the swish of water, the slap of fabric against itself, but her mind kept drifting back to Tarek's words. A friend. The phrase lingered in the air like smoke, twisting her thoughts. She imagined all the possible scenarios, each one more troubling than the last. Her hands wrung the damp clothes with force, the sound of fabric twisting a sharp counterpoint to the calm hum of the city outside. Even as she scrubbed the counters and straightened cushions, her senses felt heightened, attuned to every creak of the apartment, every faint sound from the streets below. The evening had taken on a different texture, one of suspense, of anticipation, as if the quiet walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting. By the time the last dish was rinsed, Aisha leaned against the sink, shoulders heavy but alert. Somewhere deep inside, a seed of unease had taken root, growing quietly, imperceptibly. Tonight, something was coming. Something she could not yet name, but would soon uncover, and it would change everything. The apartment, once familiar and safe, now felt like the stage for a secret she was about to witness. Aisha had just finished wiping the counters for the third time that evening when a muffled laugh drifted from the living room. Her pulse quickened. Tarek's friend, or whoever this friend was, had arrived earlier than expected. She paused, leaning against the doorway, her hand still damp from the sponge. The apartment, usually a place of quiet labor, now felt charged, electric. Every creak of the floorboards seemed louder, every faint whisper from the other room sharper. She tiptoed closer, drawn by curiosity she couldn't resist, yet careful to remain unseen. Tarek's voice floated to her like a knife wrapped in silk. Ah, yes, you see, I have her handled completely, he said, laughing softly. She works for me, follows my every command. Doesn't question, doesn't complain, just like she's supposed to. Aisha's heart skipped. She pressed herself against the wall, the cool plaster chilling her palms, and froze. Personal, handled completely? The words didn't make sense at first, then cut through her like glass. Exactly, Tarek continued, oblivious to her presence. 3 jobs she works just to keep everything running smoothly for me. And she thinks it's all for our family, huh? She has no idea. The faint shuffle of another presence, a soft laugh, made her stomach knot. Mistress or servant, she didn't yet know, but the casualness in their voices, the way they spoke of her life as if it were a performance for Tarek's amusement, sent a cold wave through her chest. Aisha's hands trembled. She gripped the doorway, knuckles white, trying to steady herself. Every moment stretched, heavy and cruel. Memories of exhaustion, missed meals, sleepless nights, and unending labor came rushing back, 3 jobs, countless sacrifices, all for a man who saw her life as trivial, a means to his own amusement. I can't believe she has no clue, Tarek said again, his voice tinged with pride. Sometimes I wonder how she manages it all, but it's perfect. She doesn't question, she just works. Aisha's vision blurred. She felt the room spin, her legs weak beneath her. Perfect? All these years of toil, all the love and loyalty, reduced to a trophy of obedience in his eyes. Her chest ached with betrayal, a bitter cocktail of anger, grief, and disbelief. She swallowed hard, holding back a sob that threatened to escape, forcing herself to step quietly backward. The small apartment, which had once been her sanctuary, now felt like a cage she had been trapped in for years. Every laugh, every boast from Tariq tore at the foundation of trust she had built her life upon. Aisha moved to the kitchen window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the city sparkled with lights, alive and indifferent, unaware of the storm unfolding high above in a quiet apartment. Tonight, her world had shifted irrevocably. And deep down, beneath the shock and betrayal, a fire began to burn, a quiet, dangerous determination that this would not be the end of her story. The hum of the city outside seemed to fade as Aisha's mind drifted back, carried on memories she had long tried to tuck away. She remembered the first morning she had stepped into the cafe, sun barely touching the horizon, the streets of Lagos still hazy with early traffic and the scent of roasted corn wafting through the air. Her uniform was stiff, her shoes worn, but her resolve was unshakable. She had promised herself she would do whatever it took to support their life, even if it meant sacrificing every ounce of comfort she could claim for herself. Hours passed in a blur of steaming coffee machines and clattering dishes, the chatter of customers blending into the background of her determination. "Table 4 wants their cappuccinos," she murmured to herself, balancing trays with precision, careful not to spill a drop. A colleague passed by, laughing at a joke she didn't hear, and she smiled faintly, even as her body ached. The day would bleed into night, and the cafe's lights would dim as she rushed to her next job, a call center tucked in the corner of a busy street, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on her tired face. "Yes, ma'am, I understand," she would repeat over and over, polite and composed, even as her throat grew sore from endless apologies and explanations. The city outside pulsed with life, unaware of the silent labor she poured into every shift, every keystroke, every whispered thank you she forced herself to smile through. And then there were the evenings spent tutoring local children, their eager faces lighting up with each lesson she delivered. She had barely eaten, barely rested, yet she offered patience, guidance, and energy she barely possessed. "Great job today," a child would say, and she would smile, biting back the exhaustion and reminding herself, "It's for him, it's for us." In contrast, flashes of Tariq drifted through her memory, him at dinners she had never attended, laughing with friends in suits she couldn't afford, driving cars that shone beneath the city lights. He was always charming, always carefree, seemingly untouched by the burdens she carried quietly in her arms. She remembered nights she collapsed onto a thin mattress, counting coins in her hand to make sure the bills were paid. "Just a little longer," she whispered to the darkness, "and it'll all be okay." But the okay had never come for her, not fully, not yet. And now, as she stood in the quiet apartment, that montage of sacrifice pressed against her like a physical weight. Every tired morning, every skipped meal, every late night of labor had been hers alone. The contrast between her tireless devotion and Tariq's indulgent, thoughtless life hit her anew, sharper than ever, carving a hollow ache of betrayal deep into her chest. Aisha's eyes closed briefly, letting the memories wash over her, preparing her for the confrontation she knew was coming. The fire in her chest was no longer just frustration, it had become purpose. Aisha sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring at the faint glow of the city lights through the apartment window. The hum of traffic far below mixed with the distant laughter of street vendors closing their stalls, yet all of it felt distant, almost muted. Inside her chest, her heart raced, a storm of emotions churning, betrayal, fury, hurt, and a fierce determination that made her pulse quicken. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms. How could he? How could he reduce everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed, to some joke, some game he could brag about? The words from earlier echoed in her mind, Tariq's casual laughter and the cruel pride in his voice. She could still feel the sting, sharp and bitter, as if it had cut her open. Aisha rose slowly, moving to the small mirror near the doorway. She studied her reflection, tired eyes rimmed with dark circles, hair slightly disheveled, yet a fire burned in her gaze. She took a deep breath, drawing the strength that had carried her through 3 jobs, countless sleepless nights, and endless bills. I won't let him make me invisible. Not tonight. Her fingers traced the edges of the bills she had stacked earlier, the reminders of her sacrifices. Each one now felt like a badge, proof of her endurance, of the life she had built through sheer will. She whispered to herself, almost as a prayer. I've worked for this life. I've given everything. He cannot take it from me. The apartment felt smaller now, the air thick with tension. Aisha imagined the confrontation, the words she would speak, the questions she would demand answers to. She rehearsed them quietly under her breath. Why? How could you? Do you even see me? She paced the small living room, each step measured, deliberate, grounding herself. The distant sound of a motorbike outside reminded her of the world beyond these walls, a world that didn't care for her suffering, yet she had a choice, here, in this space. She could reclaim her power. She paused by the window again, the city lights reflected in her eyes like tiny sparks. This isn't just about betrayal, she thought. It's about justice. About me. A hush fell over the apartment, heavy and expectant, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Her jaw set firmly. The tears she had held back all evening pooled for a fleeting moment, but she let them slide away silently, leaving only clarity and purpose. Tonight, she would confront him. Tonight, she would no longer be a silent witness to her own life being stolen. Aisha took one last steadying breath, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She knew the path ahead would be tense, painful, and uncertain, but she was ready. The storm had been building for years, and now it was time for it to break. Aisha's hand trembled slightly as she stepped into the living room, the soft hum of the city outside like a distant heartbeat. Tarek lounged on the sofa, a glass of wine in hand, his laughter light and careless, while a woman, dressed in a sharp, flamboyant outfit, sat nearby, chatting softly with him. The casual intimacy between them hit Aisha like a physical blow. She swallowed, her throat tight, and forced her voice steady. Tarek, we need to talk. He looked up, his smile faltering just a fraction, but quickly replaced with his usual charm. Ah, my love. You're home. Everything okay? Don't play games, Aisha said, stepping closer, her hands clenching at her sides. I heard everything. Every word. The personal slave. The bragging. Do you even realize what you've done? The room fell into tense silence. The mistress's eyes widened slightly, the color draining from her face as she realized the storm had arrived. Tarek set down his glass, leaning back in the sofa, trying to keep his composure. Aisha, wait, it's not what you think, he said quickly, defensive now, the casual laughter gone. Not what I think. Aisha's voice rose, sharp and trembling with fury. You call her a slave, Tarek. You brag about her obedience as if my life, my sacrifice, is nothing. Do you know how many nights I've gone without sleep, how many days I worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat? And you reduce it to a joke. Tarek's jaw tightened. You're overreacting. You never understand. I provide for us. Provide? Aisha cut in, the room seeming to shrink around her. I provided. I've sacrificed everything. And you lie and manipulate behind my back, treating me like I'm invisible. The mistress shifted uncomfortably, realizing she had no part in this battle and yet could not escape the intensity radiating from Aisha. Tarek's hands rose slightly, a weak attempt at placation. Aisha, calm down. We can talk about this. No, Aisha snapped, her eyes flashing. There's nothing to calm down. You've been hiding your truth for years, and I finally heard it. And now, you're going to answer for it. The tension in the room was electric, almost palpable. Outside, the city lights twinkled innocently, unaware of the storm erupting high above. Tarek opened his mouth, searching for words, but the conviction in Aisha's stance silenced him. Her rage was not just anger, it was the culmination of years of unnoticed labor, sleepless nights, and unacknowledged devotion. She stepped closer, her presence commanding, the air around her charged with determination. "I trusted you. I gave you everything. And this is what I get." Her voice broke for a fleeting second, but she quickly regained control, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if anchoring herself against the tide of betrayal. For the first time, Tarek seemed uncertain, his facade cracking under the weight of truth. And in that moment, Aisha realized something vital: she was no longer powerless. The confrontation had begun. Aisha stepped out onto the balcony, the cool night air washing over her like a brief relief from the suffocating tension inside the apartment. The city sprawled below, a glittering labyrinth of neon lights, honking cars, and distant laughter from late-night street vendors closing their stalls. From this height, Lagos seemed alive, indifferent, and impossibly vast, yet in that same expanse, she felt profoundly small, betrayed, and exposed. She leaned on the railing, letting the wind tousle her hair, her mind racing. Every memory of sacrifice, every sleepless night, every skipped meal replayed like a montage behind her eyes. All for him. All for us. And now, for what? A casual brag, a cruel joke, a betrayal she never imagined. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket, but she ignored it, letting the device rest there, silent. She didn't need more reminders of the man who had taken her loyalty for granted. Aisha's gaze traveled to the streets below. Minibuses rattled along dusty roads, hawkers called out their last sales for the night, and the faint aroma of grilled suya drifted up to her balcony. Life continued for everyone else, unbothered by the storm raging inside her. She envied them, even briefly, for their freedom from deceit and betrayal. She walked back inside the apartment, each step measured, deliberate. The silence that had once felt comforting now pressed heavily against her chest. She paused in the living room, letting her eyes drift over the remnants of the confrontation, Tarek's glass still on the table, the faint perfume of the mistress lingering in the air. "Is this what it's always been?" she whispered to herself, her voice trembling yet firm. "Have I been invisible all along?" Her hand brushed over the bills she had stacked earlier, the reminders of her tireless labor. They felt heavier now, but they also reminded her of something else, her resilience, her strength, her ability to survive. "I've carried this life alone for years. I can survive the truth too." Aisha moved toward the small hallway that led to the door, the apartment behind her suddenly feeling like a cage she no longer wanted to inhabit. The night outside seemed to pulse with possibility, each distant sound echoing like a challenge. She wrapped her coat around her shoulders, stepped out, and let the cool night air embrace her again. Her pace was steady as she walked along the quiet streets, the city lights casting long shadows that danced alongside her. Every step was a meditation, a reckoning, a promise to herself. She didn't yet know what her next move would be, but one thing was clear: she would no longer be silent, she would no longer be invisible, and she would no longer let betrayal define her life. The wind whipped gently against her face as she whispered, almost to the city itself, "I will take back what's mine. I will be free." And with that, the weight in her chest began to shift, replaced with the first glimmer of determination that would guide her toward the storm she was ready to face. Aisha woke the next morning to the soft hum of the city stirring outside her window. The first light of dawn stretched across the skyline, painting Lagos in shades of gold and amber. For the first time in weeks, she felt a clarity that went beyond exhaustion or grief. It was the quiet, steady pulse of purpose. She stood by the window, arms crossed, staring at the streets below. Vendors were setting up their stalls, children scurried off to school, and cars wove through the traffic like veins pumping life into the city. Everything moved forward, unrelenting, and she realized she could no longer remain stagnant in a life built on lies. Aisha moved to the small desk by the corner of the room, pulling out the neatly stacked bills she had wrestled with for so long. This time, however, she didn't approach them with resignation or dread. She approached them with strategy, determination, and a spark of excitement. She would organize, prioritize, and take control, not for Tarek, not for anyone else, but for herself. "I've carried this for too long," she whispered to the quiet apartment. Now, it's mine to manage. Mine to reclaim. She picked up her phone and opened the banking app, her fingers steady. Payments, balances, transfers, each action felt like a stitch sewing together the frayed edges of her life. The weight of years of invisible labor pressed down, but she welcomed it now, not as a burden, but as proof of her capability. Dressing carefully in a simple yet elegant outfit, she glanced at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes, once dulled with fatigue and sorrow, now shone with resolve. No longer would she let anyone define her worth or diminish her efforts. She had survived betrayal, she had endured hardship. She was stronger than she had ever realized. A soft breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of the bustling streets below, the aroma of fried plantains, fresh bread, and the faint hint of jasmine from a neighbor's balcony. It reminded her of the life beyond the walls that had once felt confining, and she smiled. Aisha picked up her bag, securing her essentials. Today was the beginning of something new. Perhaps she would leave Tariq, perhaps she would redefine her relationship with him on her own terms, but whatever she chose, it would be by her choice, with her power intact. Stepping out onto the balcony, she took a deep breath, letting the city's energy mingle with her own. "This is my life," she murmured. "My time. My strength. My future." And as the sun rose higher, spilling light across Lagos in a radiant glow, Aisha walked forward with quiet confidence. She was no longer just surviving, she was reclaiming, rebuilding, and rising. The chapter of betrayal had ended, but her story, vibrant and unbroken, was only just beginning.